On May 17, 1979, with the aid of the famous Chicago win, the Cubs and Phillies played possibly the craziest regular season game in MLB history. A game that featured just about everything you can imagine and a back-and-forth record-setting offensive performance by both teams. So let's look at that wild, historic game.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
Going into this game, both the Cubs and Phillies were going in similar but different directions. At that point, the Cubs hadn't made the playoffs since 1945, when they lost the World Series. They got in close many times throughout the 70s, but they could never make the big dance. As for the Phillies, prior to 1976, they had made the postseason just twice. But you have to remember there was just the World Series until 1969. Regardless, the mid to late 70s was the first time the Phillies had sustained success. They lost every NLCS from 76 to 78, but they were at least in the postseason. And expectations were high going into 1979, while much of the same was expected for the Cubs. And it was shown by how they were doing to that point. The Cubs were 15-16, while the Phillies were 23-10, and at least one team would score more runs than they had wins at that point. And the biggest indication that this game might be an offensive battle is the weather. Fun fact, Chicago is called the Windy City because it's windy. And it proved itself that day, with the wind at Wrigley Field blowing out at 18 miles per hour at the standard 1:30 start time, and never calming down throughout the day. And if the game the day prior gave any indication, the Phillies' bats were hot, as they recorded 16 hits and 13 runs off the Cubs' pitching, while the Cubs scored approximately 0 runs, which was the standard for their pitching, as at that point, they had a league-best 2.91 ERA. But that was going to skyrocket after this next game. On the mound for the Cubs was Dennis Lamp, and well, the lamp would burn out quick. Big McBride and Larry Bowa would record hits to start the game, then after a Pete Rose groundout, Mike Schmidt would hit a 3-run home run to break the game open. And it didn't end there. Dale Unser and Gary Maddox got singles, then Bob Boone hit a 3-run home run to make things 6-0. And that was it for Lamp, as he recorded just 1 out and gave up 6 runs. Donnie Moore came in and got out of the inning with just 1 additional run, that coming on a solo home run hit by Phillies starting pitcher Randy Lurch, the biggest indication that things were rolling for the Phillies. Members of the Phillies joked that they never gave Lurch any run support, and that was true, as in his first 8 starts of the year, he only gave up more than 3 earned runs once, and in 6 of those 8 starts, the Phillies were not winning when he came out. So that first inning gave him the support that he was looking for, but he couldn't take advantage. He gave up 3 straight singles to start the game, then going along with the theme, Dave Kingman hit a 3-run home run to make things 7-4. Lurch would record an out, but after Jerry Martin hit a double, that was it for him. It was just like Lamp, he recorded just 1 out before being pulled. Only he would end up giving up 5 earned runs instead of 6, and 6 would be the amount of runs the Cubs had after 1. After pitcher Donnie Moore hit a triple to drive in the 6th run off Doug Bird. Then Moore and Bird would both put up zeros in the 2nd, not something the 14,000 fans at Wrigley were going to get used to. The Phillies then topped their first inning in the 3rd, with 6 of their first 7 hitters in the inning getting on, ending Donnie Moore's day with a score of 9-6. And into the game came a future MVP reliever in Willie Hernandez, with runners on 2nd and 3rd. He would give up an RBI groundout after intentionally walking Mike Schmidt, then he would fit in with the other pitchers by giving up a 3-run home run to Gary Maddox to make things 15-6, and that would be the score to end the 3rd after the Cubs could not score. So it looked like the Phillies were going to destroy the Cubs again, and it continued as Pete Rose and Gary Maddox both hit RBI singles in the 4th to make things 17-6. But the Cubs weren't completely out of it, as they put up a field goal in the bottom half in Doug Bird's final inning, with Dave Kingman's 2nd home run of the day being a 2-run home run, and Steve Ontiveros would follow him up with a solo home run to make things 16-9. Then in Willie Hernandez's final inning, the Phillies scored an additional 5 runs, with just 2 of the 10 batters in the inning recording a hit. And with the Phillies up 21-9, Larry Bowa later joked, "I figured we could win if we kept them under 2 touchdowns, and could block a couple of extra points." And using football terminology would be a great way to describe the game. And into the game in the bottom of the 5th came Tug McGraw. And in the 5th, the Cubs scored a touchdown. The first 4 batters got on, and after getting Mike Vail to pop out, Bill Buckner one-upped everyone by hitting a grand slam to make things 21-14. And Jerry Martin would score a safety 3 batters later with a 2-run home run. Tug McGraw faced just 1 more batter, and later said, "I gave up 7 runs in 1/3 of an inning. It took me the rest of the year to get my ERA back into 3 digits. Ron Reed finished the inning for a 21-16 score after the 5th inning. At that point, the most runs scored in the game by one team was 29, by the Red Sox in 1950. and the White Sox did as well 5 years later. And the NL record was 28 by the Cardinals in 1929. And while it looked like the Phillies had a chance earlier in the game to break the record, now it looked like both teams had at least a small chance to make history on their own. The Phillies couldn't score any in the loud top of the 6th, and the Cubs kept chipping away in the bottom half. The Cubs got 2 hits to lead off the inning, then 2 groundouts would result in 2 runs. And then, Dave Kingman would hit his 3rd home run of the game. This is a solo home run to make things 21-19, putting him a grand slam away from the home run cycle. And without context in a football game, you would assume the Cubs football team failed a 2-point conversion. That would change to assuming they double-doinked a field goal, and Bob Boone hit a double in the top of the 7th to put the Phillies up 22-19. And that would be the quietest inning since the 2nd, as that was the only run scored. And just like the 2nd, there would be back-to-back half innings with only 4 batters coming to the plate. But things started out quick for the Cubs in the bottom of the 8th. They would hit 3 straight singles to pass the 20-run mark, then Ron Reed would get the next 2, but then Jerry Martin and Barry Foote would hit back-to-back singles, officially erasing what was once a 12-run deficit, and a single that tied the game at 22. One of the wildest things you could ever say about a baseball game. Ron Reed would get the next batter, and into the game for the Cubs came the best closer in the game, and eventually the first Hall of Fame closer in Bruce Sutter, who was looking to keep the game tied at 22. He was the 6th pitcher to pitch for the Cubs, numbers that would drop the average pitchers per game for the Rays, and things got scary when Rudy Maioli walked with 1 out, then stole 2nd. But Sutter was able to get the next 2. And into the game came the Phillies' 5th pitcher, Raleigh Eastwick. And for the first time in the entire game, there was a 1-2-3 inning. And that meant things were going to extras, all tied up at 22. Sutter got Larry Bowen and Pete Rose to start with the inning, and up to the plate came the Phillies' franchise player, and Mike Schmidt. He had walked 4 times in the game, and the Cubs would end up wishing they had walked him a 5th, as on a 3-2 pitch, he would send one deep into the left field bleachers. One Sutter knew was gone, as he didn't even turn his head to look, as the Phillies were now up 23-22, which would be the score in the bottom of the 10th. Eastwick remained in the game and got Bill Buckner to fly out, Dave Kingman to strike out, then Steve Ontiveros to ground out, to end one of the wildest games in MLB history. Even crazier that a game with 45 runs ended with a pitcher retiring the last 6 batters. After the game, Mike Schmidt would jokingly say, "Ball players often will say that you can never get enough runs to win in this park, but they always say it sarcastically. After today, they can forget the sarcasm." Apparently there's an old joke in Chicago where a guy walks into a bar and says, "Hey, the Cubs scored 20 today." Then the other guy says, "Did they win?" Well, in this case, no, they did not win. Some days you score 1 and win, some days you score 22 and lose. When the Cubs tied in the 8th, it was a case of whoever wins this game will have a mark on an incredible offensive performance. Bill Buckner went 4 for 7 with 7 RBIs, Dave Kingman hit 3 home runs, and every starting position player got a hit. But only 8 of those came out a winner in a game where there were 45 runs, 50 hits, 11 home runs, 127 plate appearances, 11 pitchers, 37 players used, and somehow the Phillies were never losing in this game. And for those who are playing baseball scoregami, then they won, as a 23-22 score never happened in MLB history, and it hasn't happened again, although it has happened 14 times in the NFL. But something wild is that this actually isn't the highest scoring game in MLB history, as the game in 1922 had 49 runs, and the 2 teams playing that day, the Cubs and the Phillies at Wrigley Field, that ended with the Cubs winning 26-23 with 51 combined hits. And had the Cubs won that game in 1979, they would have set the NL record for a comeback and tied the MLB record at 12. And the NL record they would have broke was an 11-run comeback set by the Phillies in 1976. And as you may have guessed, they were facing the Cubs at Wrigley Field, and they would also win in 10 innings with a score of 18-16. Also thanks to a 10th inning Mike Schmidt home run, which was his 4th home run of the day. So there seems to be something in the air when these two face at Wrigley Field. And who knows what football score they'll put up if they ever play in the playoffs, such as 6-1, the most impossible but possible score in football. And you can watch my recent video about why it took over 70 years for night games to start being played at Wrigley Field.